Hello and welcome to the history of the USS Missouri, BB-63. The USS Missouri, BB-63 Mighty Mo or Big Mo, is an Iowa-class battleship and the third ship of the United States Navy to be named after the U.S. state of Missouri. Missouri was the last battleship commissioned by the United States and is best remembered as the site of the surrender of the Empire of Japan, which ended World War II. Missouri was ordered in 1940 and commissioned in 1944. In the Pacific theater of World War II, she fought the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and shelled the Japanese home islands. And she fought in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. She was decommissioned in 1955 into the United States Reserve Fleet, the Mothball Fleet, but reactivated and modernized in 1984 as part of the 600-ship Navy plan, and provided fire support during Operation Desert Storm in January to February in 1991. Missouri received a total of 11 battle stars for service in World War II, Korea, and the Persian Gulf, and was finally decommissioned on March 31, 1992, after serving a total of 16 years of active service, but remained on the Naval Vessel Register until her name was struck in January 1995. In 1998, she was donated to the USS Missouri Memorial Association and became a museum ship at Pearl Harbor. Missouri was one of the Iowa-class fast battleships, designs planned in 1938 by the Preliminary Design Branch at the Bureau of Construction and Repair. She was laid down at the Brooklyn Navy Yards on January 6, 1941. Then launched on January 29, 1944, and commissioned on June 11th, with Captain William Callahan in command. The ship was the third of the Iowa class, but the fourth and final Iowa class commissioned by the U.S. Navy. The ship was christened at her launching by Mary Margaret Truman, daughter of Harry S. Truman, then a United States Senator from Missouri. Missouri's main battery consisted of 9 16-inch 50 caliber Mark 7 guns, which could fire 2,700 pounds of armor-piercing shells some 20 miles. Her secondary battery consisted of 25-inch 38 caliber guns in twin turrets with a range of about 10 miles. With the advent of air power and the need to gain and maintain air superiority, came the need to protect the growing fleet of Allied aircraft carriers. To this end, Missouri was fitted with an array of 20mm and 40mm anti-aircraft guns to defend Allied carriers from enemy airstrikes. When reactivated in 1984, Missouri had her 20mm and 40mm AA guns removed, and was outfitted with a phalanx CIWS mounts for protection against enemy missile and aircrafts, and the armored box launchers and quad cell launchers designed to fire the Tomahawk missiles and Harpoon missiles, respectively. Missouri and her sister ship, the Wisconsin, were fitted with thicker transverse bulkhead armor, 14.5 inches, compared to the 11.3 inches in the first two ships of her class, the Iowa and the New Jersey. Missouri was the last U.S. battleship to be completed. Wisconsin, the highest numbered U.S. battleship built, was completed before Missouri. The last two Iowa-class battleships, the Illinois and the Kentucky, were ordered but canceled. And all 5 of the 12-gun Montana-class vessels, the BB-67 to the BB-71, that were ordered in May 1942 were also canceled by late 1943. World War II, 1944 to 1945. Shakedown and service with Task Force 58, Admiral Mitcher. After trials off New York and shakedown and battle practices in the Chesapeake Bay, Missouri departed Norfolk, Virginia on November 11, 1944, then transited to the Panama Canal on November 18th, and steamed to San Francisco for final fitting out as a fleet flagship. She stood out of San Francisco Bay on December 14th and arrived at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 24th, 1944. She departed Hawaii on January 2nd, 1945 and arrived in the West Caroline Islands on January 13th. There she was the temporary headquarters for Vice Admiral Mark A. Mitcher. The battleship put to sea on January 27 to serve in the screen of the Lexington Carrier Task Group of Mitcher's TF-58. And on February 16th, the task force aircraft carriers launched the first naval airstrikes against Japan since the famed Doolittle raid, which had been launched from the carrier Hornet in April 1942. Missouri then steamed with the carriers to Iwo Jima, where her main guns provided direct and continuous support to the invasion landings that began on February 19th. After TF-58 returned to the Carolina Islands on March 5th, Missouri was assigned to the Yorktown Carrier Group. On March 14th, Missouri departed the Carolina Islands in the screen of the fast carriers and steamed to the Japanese mainland. During strikes against targets along the coast of the inland sea of Japan, beginning on March 18th, Missouri shot down 4 Japanese aircraft. Raids against airfields and naval bases near the inland sea and southwestern Honshu continued. Honshu is the largest and most populated island of Japan. When the carrier Franklin incurred battle damage, the Missouri's Carrier Task Group provided cover for the Franklin's retirement towards the Carolina Islands until March 22nd, then set a course for pre-invasion strikes and the bombardment of Okinawa. Missouri joined the fast battleships of TF-58 in bombarding the southeast coast of Okinawa on March 24th, an action intended to draw the enemy's strength from the west coast beaches that would be the actual site of the invasion landings. Missouri rejoined the screen of the carriers as Marines and Army units stormed the beaches of Okinawa on April 1st. An attack by Japanese forces was repulsed successfully. On April 11th, a low-flying Kamikaze Zero, although fired upon, crashed on Missouri's starboard side, just below her main deck level. The starboard wing of this plane was thrown far forward, starting a gasoline fire at 5 in gun mount number 3. The battleship suffered only superficial damage, and the fire was brought quickly under control. The remains of the pilot were recovered on board the ship just aft of one of the 40mm gun tubs. Although crewmen wanted to hose the remains over the side, Captain Callaghan decided that the young Japanese pilot had done his job to the best of his ability and with honor, so he should be given a military funeral. The following day, he was buried at sea with military honors. The dent made by the Zero in the Missouri side remains to this day. On April 17th, at about 23:05 hours, Missouri detected an enemy submarine 12 miles from her formation. Her report set off a hunter-killer operation in the light carrier Bataan and 4 destroyers, which sank the Japanese submarine, I-56. Missouri was detached from the carrier task force off Okinawa on the 5th of May and sailed for the Carolina Islands. During the Okinawa campaign, she shot down 5 enemy planes, assisted in the destruction of 6 others, and scored 1 probable kill. She helped repel 12 daylight attacks of enemy raiders and fought off 4 night attacks on her carrier task group. Her shore bombardment destroyed several gun emplacements and many other military, government, and industrial structures. Service with the 3rd Fleet, Admiral Halsey. Missouri arrived at the Carolina Islands May 9th and then proceeded to the Apura Harbor, Guam, arriving on the 18th of May. That afternoon, Admiral William F. Hastley, Jr., commanded the 3rd Fleet. He brought his staff from the cruiser Louisville onto the Missouri. She passed out of the harbor on May 21st, and by May 27th was again conducting shore bombardments against Japanese positions in Okinawa. Missouri led the Third Fleet in strikes on airfields and installations on Kuhashu on June 2nd to the 3rd. Her fleet again struck Kuhashu on June 8th and then hit hard in a coordinated air-surface bombardment before retiring towards Leyte. She arrived at San Pedro Bay on June 13th, almost 3 months after continuous operations in support of the Okinawa campaign. Here she rejoined the powerful Third Fleet in strikes at the heart of Japan from within its own home waters. The fleet set a northerly course on July 8th to approach the Japanese main island, Honshu. Raids took Tokyo by surprise on July 10th, followed by more devastation at the juncture of Honshu and Hokkaido, the second biggest Japanese island, on July 13th to the 14th. For the first time, naval gunfire destroyed a major installation within the home islands when Missouri joined a shore bombardment on July 15th that severely damaged the Ninhon Steel Co. and the Wanshi Ironworks at Hokkaido. During the nights of the 17th and 18th of July, Missouri bombarded industrial targets in Honshu. Island Sea aerial strikes continued through July 25th, and Missouri guarded the carriers as they attacked the Japanese home islands. Signing of the Japanese Instrument of Surrender. Strikes on Hokkaido and North Honshu resumed on August 9th, the day the second atomic bomb was dropped. After the Japanese agreed to surrender, Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser of the Royal Navy, commander of the British Pacific Fleet, boarded the Missouri on August 16th and conferred the honor of the Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the British Empire upon Admiral Halsey. Missouri transferred a landing party of 200 officers and men to the battleship Iowa for a temporary duty within the initial occupation force of Fort Tokyo on August 21st. Missouri herself entered Tokyo Bay early August 29th to prepare for the signing of the Japanese of the official instrument of surrender. High-ranking military officers of all Allied powers were received on board September 2nd, including Chinese General Hu Yang Chang and British Admiral of the Fleet Sir Bruce Fraser, Soviet Lieutenant General Kuzuma Mikhailovich, and Australian General Sir Thomas Blamsey, Canadian Colonel Lawrence Moore Cosgrave, French General d'Armée Philip, Dutch Vice Admiral Conrad Emerald Lambert Helffinch, and New Zealand Vice Admiral Marshal Leonard M. Lissett. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz boarded shortly after 8 in the morning, and General of the Army Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander for the Allies, came on board at 08:43. The Japanese representatives arrived at 8:56, and at 9:02 General MacArthur stepped on board a battery of microphones and opened a 23-minute surrender ceremony to the waiting world by stating, "It is my earnest hope, indeed the hopes of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. A world founded upon faith and understanding, a world dedicated to the dignity of man and the fulfillment of his most cherished wish for freedom, tolerance, and justice." During the surrender ceremony, the deck of the Missouri was decorated with a 31-star American flag that had been taken ashore by Commodore Matthew Perry in 1853 after his squadron of black ships sailed into Tokyo Bay to force the opening of Japan's ports to foreign trade. By 9:30, the Japanese emissaries had departed. In the afternoon of September 5th, Admiral Halsey transferred his flag to the battleship South Dakota, and early the next day the Missouri departed Tokyo Bay. As part of the ongoing Operation Magic Carpet, she received homeward-bound passengers at Guam, then sailed unescorted for Japan. She arrived at Pearl Harbor on September 20th and flew Admiral Nimitz's flag on the afternoon of September 28th for a reception. Post-war, 1946 to 1950. The next day, Missouri departed Pearl Harbor bound for east seaboards of the United States. She reached New York City on October 23rd and hoisted the flag of the Atlantic Fleet Commander, Admiral Jonas Ingram. 4 days later, Missouri boomed out a 21-gun salute as President Truman boarded for Navy Day ceremonies. After an overhaul in New York naval shipyards and a training cruise to Cuba, Missouri returned to New York. Throughout the latter half of the 1940s, the various service branches of the United States have been reducing their inventories from the World War II levels. For the Navy, this resulted in several vessels of various types being decommissioned and either sold for scrap or placed in one of the various United States Naval Reserve fleets, scattered along the east and west coasts of the United States. As part of this contraction, 3 of the Iowa-class battleships had been deactivated and decommissioned. However, President Truman refused to allow the Missouri to be decommissioned. Against the advice of the Secretary of Defense Lewis Johnson, Secretary of the Navy John L. Sullivan, and Chief Naval Operations Lewis E. Denfield, Truman ordered the Missouri to be maintained with the active fleet, partly because of his fondness for the battleship and partly because the battleship had been christened by his daughter, Margaret Truman. Then the only U.S. battleship in commission, Missouri was proceeding seaward on a training mission from Hampton Roads early January 17, 1950, when she ran aground 1.6 miles from Thimble's Shoal Light near Old Point Comfort. She hit the shallow water a distance of 3 ship lengths from the main channel. Lifted some 7 feet above the waterline, she struck hard and fast. With the aid of tugboats, pontoons, and a raising tide, she refloated on February 1st, 1950, and repaired. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953. In 1950, the Korean War broke out, prompting the United States to intervene in the name of the United Nations. President Truman was caught off guard when the invasion struck, but quickly ordered the U.S. forces stationed in Japan into South Korea. Truman also sent U.S.-based troops, tanks, fighters, and bomber aircraft, and a strong naval force to Korea to support the Republic of Korea. As part of the naval mobilization, Missouri was called upon from the Atlantic Fleet and dispatched from New Fork on August 19th to support the UN forces on the Korean Peninsula. Missouri arrived just west of Kyushu on September 14th, where she became the flagship of the Rear Admiral Allen Edward Smith, the first American battleship to reach the Korean waters. She bombarded Shamkok on September 15, 1950, in an attempt to divert troops and attention from the Incheon landings. This was the first time since World War II that the Missouri had fired her guns in anger, and in company with the cruiser Helena and 2 destroyers. She helped prepare the way for the U.S. 8th Army offensive. Missouri conducted additional operations with carriers and shore bombardments off the east coast of Korea until March 19, 1951. She arrived at Yokosuka on March 24th and 4 days later was relieved of duty in the Far East. She departed Yokosuka on March 28th and upon arrival at Norfolk, April 27th, became the flagship of Rear Admiral James L. Holloway, Jr., Commander Cruiser Force of the Atlantic Fleet. During the summer of 1951, she engaged in 2 midshipman training courses to Northern Europe, under the command of Captain John Sylvester. Missouri entered Norfolk Naval Shipyard October 18, 1951, for an overhaul, which lasted until January 30th, 1952. Following winter and spring trainings out of Guantanamo Bay, Missouri visited New York, then set course for Norfolk on June 9, 1952, for another midshipman cruise. She returned to Norfolk on August 4th and entered the Norfolk Naval Shipyards to prepare for a second tour in the Korean Combat Zone. Missouri put in Incheon on January 5, 1953, and sailed thence to Sasebo, Japan. In the following weeks, Missouri resumed Cobra, patrolling along the east coast of Korea to support troops ashore, repeating bombardment of Wonsan, Tanihan, Hunganam, and Kojo destroyed main supply routes along the eastern seaboard of Korea. The last bombardment mission by Missouri was against the Kojo area March 25th. Her commanding officer, Captain Warren R. Essel, suffered a fatal heart attack while conning her through the submarine net at Sasebo. She was relieved of the 7th Fleet flagship on April 6 by her older sister, the New Jersey. Missouri departed Yokosuka on April 7th and arrived at Norfolk on May 4th to become the flagship of Rear Admiral E.T. Wooldridge, Commander Battleship Cruisers Atlantic Fleet. She departed on June 8th on a midshipman training cruise, returning to Norfolk on August 4th, and was overhauled in the Norfolk Naval Shipyard from November 20th, 1953 to April 2nd, 1954. During her next voyage, the Missouri was joined by 3 other battleships of her class, the New Jersey, Wisconsin, and Iowa, the only time the 4 ships sailed together. She returned to Norfolk on August 3rd and departed on the 23rd of August for an inactivation on the West Coast. After calls at Long Beach and San Francisco, Missouri arrived in Seattle on September 15th. 3 days later, she entered the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, where she was decommissioned February 26, 1955. Entering the Bremerton Group Pacific Reserve Fleet. Deactivation. Upon arrival in Bremerton, west of Seattle, Missouri was moored at the last pier of the Reserve Fleet berthing. She served as a popular tourist attraction, logging about 250,000 visitors per year, who came to view the surrender deck, where a bronze plaque memorialized the spot in Tokyo Bay where Japan surrendered to the Allies, and the accompanying historical data that included copies of the surrender documents and photos. A small cottage industry grew in the civilian community just outside the gates, selling souvenirs and other memorabilia. Nearly 30 years passed before the Missouri returned to active duty. Reactivation, 1984 to 1990. Under the Reagan administration's program to build 600 Navy ships, led by Secretary of the Navy John F. Ledman, Missouri was reactivated and towed by the salvage ship Beaufort to the Long Beach Naval Yard in the summer of 1984 to undergo modernization in advance of her scheduled recommissioning. In preparation of the move, a skeleton crew of 20 spent 3 weeks working 12 to 16-hour days preparing the battleship for her tow. During the modernization, Missouri had her obsolete armaments removed, the 20mm and 40mm anti-aircraft guns, and 4 of her 10 5-inch gun mounts. Over the next several months, the ship was upgraded with the most advanced weaponry available. Among the new weapon systems installed were 4 Mk-141 quad-cell launchers, 4 16 RGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles, 8 Mk-143 armored box launcher mounts, 4 32 BGM-109 Tomahawk cruise missiles, and a quartet of phalanx close-in weapon system Gatling guns for defense against enemy anti-ship missiles and enemy aircraft. Also included in her modernization were the upgrades to radar and fire control systems for her guns and missiles, and improved electronic warfare capabilities. Missouri was formally recommissioned in San Francisco on May 10, 1986. This is a day to celebrate the rebirth of America's sea power. Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger told an audience of 10,000 at the recommissioning ceremony, instructing the crew to listen to the footsteps of those who've gone before you. They speak to you of honor and the importance of duty. They remind you of your own traditions. Also in attendance at the ceremony was Margaret Truman, who christened the ship in 1943. She gave a short speech, especially aimed at the ship's crew, which ended with, "Now take care of my baby." Her remarks were met with a round of applause from the crew. 4 months later, Missouri departed from her new home port of Long Beach for an around-the-world cruise, visiting Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, Sydney, Hobart, and Perth, Australia, Diego Garcia and the Suez Canal, Istanbul, Turkey, Naples, Italy, Spain, Lisbon, Portugal, and the Panama Canal. Missouri became the first American battleship to circumnavigate the globe since Theodore Roosevelt's Great White Fleet 80 years before, a fleet which included the first battleship named the USS Missouri, BB-11. In 1987, Missouri was outfitted with 40mm grenade launchers and 25mm chain guns, and sent to take in part of Operation Ernst Will, the escorting of the reflagged Kuwaiti oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. These smaller caliber weapons were installed due to the threat of Iranian-manned, Swedish-made cigarette boats operating in the Persian Gulf at the time. On July 25th, the ship departed on a 6-month deployment to the Indian Ocean and North Arabian Sea. She spent more than 100 continuous hours in a hot, tense environment. As the centerpiece of the battle group Echo, Missouri escorted tanker convoys through the Strait of Hormuz, keeping her fire control system trained on land-based Iranian Silkworm missile launchers. Missouri returned to the United States in early 1988. In the early months of 1989, Missouri was in the Long Beach Naval Shipyard for routine maintenance. On July 1st, 1989, while berthed at Pier D, the music video for Cher's "If I Could Turn Back Time" was filmed on board the Missouri and featured the ship's crew. Gulf War, January to February 1991. On August 2nd, 1990, Iraq, led by President Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait. In the middle of the month, U.S. President George H.W. Bush, in keeping with the Carter Doctrine, sent the first of several 100,000 troops, along with a strong force of naval support, to Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf area to support a multinational force in a standoff with Iraq. Missouri's scheduled 4 months Western Pacific port-to-port cruise set to begin in September was canceled, just a few days before the ship was about to leave. She had been placed on hold in anticipation of being mobilized as forces continued to mass in the Middle East. Missouri departed November 13, 1990, for the troubled waters of the Persian Gulf. She departed from Pier 6 at Long Beach with extensive press coverage and headed for Hawaii and the Philippines for more workups en route to the Persian Gulf. During subsequent operations leading up to Operation Desert Storm, Missouri prepared to launch Tomahawk land attack missiles, TLAMs, and provided naval gunfire to support as required. Missouri fired her first Tomahawk missile at Iraqi targets at 0140 on January 17, 1991, followed by 27 additional missiles over the next 5 days. In her first naval gunfire support action of the Desert Storm, she shelled an Iraqi command and control bunker near the Saudi border. The first time her 16-inch guns had been fired in combat since March 1953 off Korea. The battleship bombarded the Iraqi beach defenses in occupied Kuwait on the night of February 3rd, firing 112 16-inch rounds over the next 3 days until relieved by the Wisconsin. Missouri then fired another 60 rounds off Kafaji on February 11th through 12th before steaming northward to the Failaka Islands. After minesweepers cleared a lane through the Iraqi defenses, Missouri fired 113 rounds during 4 shore bombardment missions as part of the amphibious landing fin against the Kuwaiti shoreline the morning of February 23rd. The heavy pounding attracted the Iraqi attention. In response to the battleship's artillery strike, the Iraqis fired 2 HY-2 Silkworm missiles at the battleship, one of which missed. The other missile was intercepted by a GWS-30 Sea Dart missile launched from the British air defense destroyer HMS Gloucester within 90 seconds and crashed into the sea roughly 70 yards in front of the Missouri. During the operation, Missouri also assisted in the coalition forces engaging in clearing Iraqi naval mines in the Persian Gulf. By the time the war ended, Missouri had destroyed at least 15 naval mines. With combat operations out of range of Missouri's weapons, on February 26, Missouri had fired a total of 783 rounds of her 16-inch shells and launched 28 Tomahawk missiles during the campaign, and commenced to conduct patrol and armistice enforcement operations in the North Persian Gulf until sailing home on March 21st. Following stops in Australia, the warship visited Pearl Harbor before arriving home in April. She spent the remainder of the year conducting type training and other local operations, the latter including December 7th's Voyage of Remembrance to mark the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor attack in 1941. During that ceremony, Missouri hosted President George H.W. Bush, the first such presidential visit for the warship since Harry S. Truman boarded the battleship in September 1947. Museum ship, 1998 to present. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s and the absence of a perceived threat to the United States, came dramatic cuts in the defense budget, and the high cost of maintaining and operating battleships as part of the United States Navy's active fleet became uneconomical. As a result, Missouri was decommissioned on March 31, 1992 at Long Beach, California after 16 total years of active service. Her last commanding officer, Captain Albert L. Cass, wrote in the ship's final plan of the day. He wrote, "Our final day has arrived. Today, the final chapter in the battleship Missouri's history will be written. It's often said that the crew makes the command. There is no truer statement, for it's the crew of this great ship that made this a great command. You are a special breed of sailors and Marines, and I am proud to have served with each and every one of you. To you who have made the painful journey of putting this great lady to sleep, I thank you, for you have had the toughest job. To put away a ship that has become as much a part of you as you are of her is a sad ending to a great tour. But take solace in this, you have lived up to the history of the ship and those who had sailed her before us. We took her to war, performed magnificently, and added another chapter in her history, standing side by side with our forerunners in true naval tradition. God bless you all." Captain Albert L. Cass. Missouri returned to be part of the United States Naval Reserve Fleet at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Burlington, Washington, until January 12, 1995, when she was struck from the Naval Vessel Registry. She remained in Burlington, but was not open to tourists as she had been from 1957 to 1984. In spite of attempts by citizens groups to keep her in Burlington and reopen her as a tourist site, the U.S. Navy wanted to pair a symbol of the end of World War II with one representing its beginning. On May 4, 1998, Secretary of the Navy John H. Dalton signed the donation contract that transferred her to the nonprofit USS Missouri Memorial Association of Honolulu, Hawaii. She was towed from Burlington on May 23rd to Astoria, Oregon, where she sat in fresh water at the mouth of the Columbia River to kill and drop seawater barnacles and seagrasses that had grown on her hull in Burlington. Then towed across the eastern Pacific and docked at Ford Island, Pearl Harbor on June 22nd, just 500 yards from the Arizona Memorial. Less than a year later, on January 29, 1999, Missouri was opened as a museum and operated by the MMA. Thank you for watching the history of the USS Missouri. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you can. If you already have, thank you, and have a nice day.